literacy programming and how people will use their skills on the job very transparent and clear for people. So where does our understanding of workforce essential skills programming come from? Well, first and foremost, it draws heavily on the essential skills profiles, which I imagine most of you, if not all of you, are familiar with. The essential skills profiles are used to understand job demands, and of course there are profiles for most, if not all, of the jobs now in Canada, or the job classifications in Canada. And so understanding the demands of those jobs can help people, practitioners, literacy practitioners, prepare individuals for different kinds of work. And of course the 9 essential skills, which I'm not going to bother reading out to everybody, and because I think people are quite familiar with them at this point. But certainly workforce essential skills does draw on occupational research like the essential skills profiles. The other thing that, I'm sorry, I'm just being distracted by things popping up on my screen as I talk, so I'll just go back. The other thing about workforce essential skills programming is that it targets the skills that individuals do use at work. And these might well be different from how we traditionally think about skills or think about programming in literacy, in a literacy program context. So for example, on the job, we know that individuals use documents a whole lot, and that in fact they probably use documents more than they read text. That's something that we know from occupational research. It's something that's extensively documented in the essential skills profiles, and that's something that we take advantage of in trying to understand both what the skills are that people need to be able to, should be learning in literacy programs, but also how to apply those skills. So things like introducing much more in the way of documents and perhaps a little less in the way of heavy text reading. Although text reading is still an important thing, even the way in which we introduce it and the way that we develop individual skills for managing reading might be different. So for example, when you think about the way that you use reading or the way that you read at work, there's a lot of emphasis on scanning and on skimming to find the information that you need quickly, not necessarily to start at the beginning of a 200-page manual and read it from top to bottom, but to know how to attack that text in a way that's efficient for you. And those are also the kinds of skills that we want to be able to teach in a literacy program. The other thing we recognize from occupational research is that tasks require multiple skills. And so traditionally our ways of perhaps breaking out skills and focusing on math in isolation of reading, in isolation of document use, doesn't necessarily get at the ways that individuals actually need to employ their skills in real-life tasks. We know, for example, that if you think back to that purchase order invoice that I showed a few slides back, that's an example of a document that also requires numeracy skills. It probably also requires some decision making and problem solving. It may well require some reading text skills. So all of those skills have to come together in order for an individual to be successful on that task. The numeracy, the fact that numeracy is connected to documents, I just gave that example of an invoice or a purchase order. That tends to be true across documents, that in most cases the numeracy that we do on the job tends to be related to some kind of documentation. And finally, and these are just examples, but when we think about the ways in which we use writing on the job, it's quite different potentially from the way that we tend to teach writing or emphasize writing in an academic context. And so writing on the job, first of all, what we know from essential skills research is that people do need to write, but they tend to write fairly brief text, and they tend to write to explain things, to recommend things, to persuade. The writing does have to be clear, it has to be brief. It's probably okay if there's 1 or 2 spelling errors, but more than anything it has to be functional. And so if what we're doing in traditional literacy programs is really emphasizing very long expository writing or descriptive writing, we may not be paying attention to the ways in which people actually need to write when they get to the job. So what does workforce essential skills look like? Well, in a few moments, Marisa is going to be talking about the WESCan project. And really, these core elements that are presented here on the screen come out of our understanding of workforce essential skills as it was sort of either developed or was already in place and that we were able to observe in the WESCan project. So these elements we consider to be very strong sort of underpinnings of effective workforce programming. And that is that they do include workplace-oriented learning materials so that when you look at what the instructor is teaching in the class or what learners are being exposed to in the program, it looks different from traditional literacy programs. That sessions tend to be, that sessions are facilitated. We saw a very strong connection between success in programming and having an actual facilitator teach, rather than, say, a lot of emphasis on an individual having to self-teach, go through workbooks or things like that without the advantage of any facilitation. The other elements that we saw as being very key to workforce essential skills that were played out in the WESCan project were providing learners with lots of opportunities for them to apply their skills in different ways, in different contexts, so that they understood the connections between what they were learning in the classroom and how that might apply not only to one particular job, if that was something that they had in mind, but generally to employment, to work, because this is not about teaching somebody necessarily the skills they need for a particular job, but helping them to understand how the skills that they're learning can be applicable across many, many different types of jobs. We saw that holistic programming was a very valuable model. So programming that didn't just focus on somebody's immediate needs to get to find work, but also focused on other aspects of their of themselves as learners. And we'll talk a little bit in more detail about that in a few moments. And finally, programs that were able to get some kind of work placement, whether volunteer, whether a brief work exposure, or whether a full-fledged work placement program with some kind of remuneration, went a long way to building very strong workforce essential skills programs. So at this point, I'm going to pass the headset over to Marisa, and she's going to tell you a little bit more about the WESCan project.
Hello, everyone. As I make myself comfortable here. So as Karen mentioned, a lot of what we're talking about today really emerged as a result of a project a 2-year project that just wrapped up a couple of months ago called the WESCan project. And WESCan stood for Workforce Essential Skills Across Canada. Now, just a tiny bit of background before I tell you about WESCan itself. WESCan is a project that PTP applied to OLES to carry out. PTP, as some of you may know, is a community-based literacy provider based in Toronto. And PTP, for quite a number of years, has been delivering workforce essential skills programming. They've also, over the years, developed a series of tools and resources that others who are interested in workforce essential skills programming can use in their programs. And they include an assessment called CAMERA, learning materials called WorkRight, and curriculum guidelines called Signposts. Now, that's just sort of the background. So PTP has been doing this for a while. But the reason that they applied to OLES to do the WESCan project is because they really wanted to spend some time thinking about what it would take to for another program to set up a workforce essential skills program, or to enhance a workforce essential skills program. They knew from experience, direct experience, that it isn't enough to just hand over a program, hand over a bunch of tools to a program who's interested in workforce essential skills. And they even knew that it wasn't enough to just provide training along with those tools, that there was something more that needed to happen between a program receiving tools and training, and then being able to set up and deliver a workforce essential skills program. So that's really where WESCan came in. So the national project was designed to support 5 partner agencies as they set up or enhanced workforce essential skills programming. At the same time as helping those partner agencies set up or enhance their programming, WESCan also collected information about what's involved in setting up or enhancing this programming. And so much of what we're talking about today really emerged from that on-the-ground experience with real programs. So what we did as part of that Workforce Essential Skills Across Canada project is we asked, we put out a call for letters of interest to ask interested agencies to apply if they wanted to be part of the project. And we had great interest from across the country. And so it wasn't very easy to choose our partners. And in the end, we were very happy with the partners that we did choose. And I'll tell you more about them in a moment. One of our partners was Parkland College, based in Yorkton, Saskatchewan. They're, of course, a college, so they delivered traditionally academic-oriented programming to learners who were interested in getting high school diplomas or GED equivalency before going on to do, other activities, whether it be further education, and in some cases, their learners were actually going on to employment. But traditionally, that's what they were offering. We also partnered with the Seychelles First Nation, based just outside of Port Alberni on Vancouver Island. Of course, the First Nation administration that was interested in providing their membership with a programming approach that would help their membership develop the abilities that they need in order to kind of move on and really engage, whether it be with work, more so in their community, or with further education and training. Another partner that we selected is Literacy Link Niagara, based in Thorold, Ontario. Literacy Link Niagara is not actually a delivery provider or a literacy provider. Instead, they are an umbrella organization. For those of you outside of Ontario, I know some of you are attending from outside of Ontario. They provide services to literacy programs in their region. We also had FutureWorks Truro as our partner. FutureWorks is an employment service agency that is based in Truro, Nova Scotia. And then our final partner was the St. John Learning Exchange, which is a community-based literacy provider based in St. John, New Brunswick. Now, what's probably fairly evident from my very brief overview of our partners is that they're all quite different from each other, from a First Nation to a college to a community-based literacy to an employment service agency, and then to a regional literacy support organization. The idea was that we wanted to really understand workforce essential skills and, the implementing and enhancing workforce essential skills programs from as many perspectives as we could. I mentioned before that WESCan really grew out of the recognition that workforce essential skills is more than just handing over learning materials that have a workforce essential skills orientation, that's part of it, but that actually setting up programming is something that's altogether different. So to really understand what that means, we wanted to really to look at what real agencies experienced as they tried to do this. And for that reason, we also wanted to look at different agencies that were different sizes, that had different areas of focus to see really what's common when it comes to setting up or enhancing workforce essential skills programming. I mentioned before that there are quite a number of things that the partners were keen to do. Although there were differences between partners, there are also similarities. They were really interested in working with others to improve programming. And that included, of course, being interested in working with PTP, but also being interested in working with other agencies who are going through a similar process. We found that there was such value in having more than one partner kind of experiencing some of the same things at the same time. It can be quite overwhelming when you encounter a challenge in programming, especially if you feel alone, and perhaps the only people around you are people who have already passed that kind of initial stage. But when everybody is going through the initial stages together, it's really an important support. Our partners also wanted to share successes and challenges with each other. Some of them were not new to Workforce Essential Skills, so they already had their own ideas and perspectives that they wanted to be able to share. Part of it, I think, was to bounce ideas off each other so that they could further their own understanding and their own ability to provide this kind of programming well. They also wanted to learn more about how to build essential skills into their existing programming. So rather than simply starting from scratch, they wanted to be able to incorporate essential skills into what they do, which was more realistic in some cases for many of them. And they, of course, wanted to work with the PTP products that I had mentioned earlier. And they also wanted to be able to consider the other supports that were required to help literacy learners make the transition to work. We know from experience that just providing literacy upgrading without considering the realities that learners face in their day-to-day lives won't necessarily get them that job, or perhaps it might, but then they may not be able to manage to keep the work that they are able to get because of the realities they face day to day. There were a number of WESCan findings, and Karen had talked about the core elements that we discovered as we started to really analyze the data we were collecting through WESCan. One of the things that we found in addition to that is that Workforce Essential Skills is an approach, not a prescription. And what we mean by that is it's not, although there are core elements, the ones that Karen mentioned, how those elements get combined and let's say the amount of time on a typical day that a learner is engaged in a practical hands-on experience might not be the same across every program. It's not, you can't just take an existing program off the shelf and say, well, we're going to do that exactly the same way here in this other community. It won't work that way. Workforce Essential Skills really does need to be customized to the community and the learner's needs in order to be successful. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. We also found that that different types of agencies can deliver Workforce Essential Skills. And I mentioned when I gave you the overview of the WESCan partners that they were all quite different from each other. And we were very pleased to see that, although the programs they implemented were quite different from each other, that those different types of agencies really were able to deliver a form of Workforce Essential Skills programming that made sense given where their agency and community was at. We also found that effective Workforce Essential Skills programs need to consider both participant and community needs. And I mentioned this before, but it's a really important point to reiterate. In order to set something up that will really engage participants and that will get you the outcomes you're hoping for, both really need to be taken into account. And we'd mentioned that Workforce Essential Skills has core elements. And one of the other things that we found through WESCan is that although Workforce Essential Skills is not a prescription, there is an implementation process that interested agencies can follow as they set up their own Workforce Essential Skills program. And I will talk about a bit more about that in a moment. Okay. Now, one of the things that we spent a fair amount of time thinking about as agencies were getting their programs set up, and our partner sites were getting their programs set up, and were making changes to the program to improve it. We looked at what was in common across all of them in terms of where they started out. One of the things was, and these we considered sort of key ingredients for implementation, those things that need to be in place in order to get a Workforce Essential Skills program off the ground. The first is a desire to better serve participants' needs. So all of our partners thought, okay, well, we're delivering programming, or we want to be delivering programming, and we want to be in a position to improve what we do. The other key ingredient was the opportunity to take community needs into account. And I know I just mentioned this in the previous slide, but it really is it was a really critical ingredient. Another was the dedicated investment to design, pilot, and refine a program. In the case of WESCan, there was obviously some funding associated with it. So WESCan received funding from OLS, and some of those funds were passed on to partner agencies to help them design and pilot a Workforce Essential Skills program. Another key ingredient was support from experts and others who are interested in accomplishing similar goals. I mentioned before how valuable it was to our partners to have other agencies or other people in different communities to talk to and to share ideas with as they were making their way from in setting up and delivering a Workforce Essential Skills program. And of course, the key ingredient for implementation is easy-to-use tools and resources. And PTP was in a position to share their tools with the partner side. So that was already in place and a key part of the project. Now, one of the things that we also spent time thinking about as we analyzed the outcomes from WESCan is the Workforce Essential Skills kind of considerations as an agency sets up a program. And we grouped them into these 4 categories: the client group, community supports, local labor market, and agency capacity. So for those of you out there who are in a position to think about whether it makes sense to set up a workforce or essential skills program at your agency or in your community, one of the things that you're probably starting with thinking about is the client group. So, are you serving, or would you like to be serving, individuals who have barriers to employment? What kind of work experience does the client group that you're hoping to serve have? What do they bring to the workforce? What will they bring to the classroom? What level is your client group at in terms of their literacy abilities? And what other skills and qualifications do clients have? And what other skills and qualifications will they need in order to go on to seek and retain employment? So these are considerations that will kind of get you thinking about the factors that will influence the type of programming that you might set up, the type of Workforce Essential Skills program you might set up. One of the other things to think about is what community supports are already in place. Karen had mentioned that Workforce Essential Skills programming, or the successful examples of Workforce Essential Skills programming, also include holistic elements. So addressing helping address the health or financial needs of participants, so that they're in a better position to pay attention during programming, as well so that they can manage, even once they're manage their kind of day-to-day needs once they move on and get some work. So one of the things that we found was helpful to consider before setting up a program is, what community supports are already in place? Are there health supports that are in the community, the counseling that you could draw on? Is there an agency that's providing job development services that perhaps you could partner with? Is there some financial aid that you could draw on for participants? Another area that you need to consider as you start thinking about your Workforce Essential Skills program is the labor market in your area. So who's hiring, essentially? What are their needs? What kinds of screening tools do they have in place? What are their expectations in terms of skills or education or certification? One of the very interesting things that you'll probably encounter as you start to think about the labor market is that perhaps employers are accustomed to using credentials like grade 12 diplomas to make decisions about which employees to hire and which they're not going to hire. So one of the things that we found during WESCan is that a part of setting up a program for our partners involved engaging in discussions with employers in their region, so that employers can begin to understand how helping or how participants with strong essential skills are in fact in a better position to use their abilities on the job than participants who have a grade 12 diploma. As Karen mentioned at the beginning, really a grade 12 diploma doesn't guarantee success on the job. Helping employers see that becomes a really important part of setting up a Workforce Essential Skills program. Another consideration is your agency's capacity. And this is very, very key because, as those of you in programs know, you could have all the best ideas in the world, and if your agency is not in a position to actually, staffing isn't available to actually carry out the tasks that need to be carried out, then those ideas really can't go anywhere. So staffing is key. Of course, training requirements are, training is another requirement to help participants get from, or help agencies get from whatever approach they're currently taking to a Workforce Essential Skills approach. Another aspect that's very key is that staff really do need time to plan and prepare. So one of the things we found during WESCan is that our partners who had dedicated staff to doing some of the planning functions ended up with much stronger programming. So rather than say, okay, instructor A, you're now going to, instead of delivering what you typically deliver, now you're going to deliver Workforce Essential Skills programming. And not giving any additional time to making that transition. Instructors needed time to plan, particularly and more so than they would normally need to plan when they're making a move from what they're used to doing to an entirely new approach, which for our partners, it really was. Even those partners who had already moved in the direction of Workforce Essential Skills, they really, they were not that far along in that process, and so they really needed time to think about, okay, well, how will I be delivering the content that I typically deliver? There are such significant differences between delivering programming where learners are working independently versus facilitated sessions, and the planning that's involved, of course, in delivering a facilitated session is so much more significant. In the end, we found that the outcomes were much more positive, so of course it was worth the planning effort, but we can't, but it is important to recognize that the planning is key. And then, of course, instructors also need instructional resources, so they're not creating everything from scratch. One of the things to think about, though, in exploring agency capacity within your own site is the willingness and the capacity of your staff to change and adapt to the new program model. We found that one of the, again, this idea of starting with a really good idea, and a really good idea can't go that far if the people on the ground don't recognize it, don't recognize the role in it, and aren't willing to try something that's different than what they're used to doing. And it unfortunately can sound like it's a criticism by saying, well, here's this other idea, perhaps you want to try something different. It will inevitably sound like what they were doing up until that point wasn't ideal. And that can be quite a challenge to overcome as your agency kind of lays the groundwork to delivering this new kind of programming. One of the things I mentioned before that we learned through WESCan was that there really are these implementation stages. I'm just going to briefly tell you what they are. And the first step in setting up a workforce essential skills program is identifying the needs. And the considerations that I was just talking about, that's part of what's involved in identifying the needs. Next is resource allocation. So what kind of resources are required to deliver the type of programming you think will best suit the needs in your community. Next is the program design stage, and that's actually where large overarching decisions about the program are made, as well as decisions that kind of guide what happens on a more day-to-day level. So that's where that kind of time for instructors to plan would happen in that stage. Then we have implementation itself, where the program is delivered, and the final stage, which in a way is the beginning of the spiral, again, is refining the program. So once the program is implemented, it's time to kind of monitor what's happening and how it can be refined. One of the things that we found through WESCan was that without asking our partners to implement and then refine their programs, all of them did. It was a natural process that they went through. They tried things out, and WESCan was a vehicle that allowed them to try things out. They tried things out, they saw what worked and what didn't, and then they made changes and tried it out again. And it was a really a fabulous thing to see. And sometimes as educators, we know that learning takes a long time, but we're not as willing to give ourselves that time as we are willing to give our participants that time. So I, of course, did not talk about the implementation stages in a great deal of detail here. But they're all documented in this guide that you see a picture of on the screen. So it's the Workforce Essential Skills Putting Literacy to Work. That guide is available as a free download from PTP's website at ptp.ca. A link to the guide will also be distributed in a follow-up email after this session. And now I'm going to pass the headset back.
Okay, and so just a few more slides to sum up, and then we have a few moments for any questions that people may have had. So the benefits. I mean, we shouldn't, I guess, ever lose track of the fact that despite the challenges and despite the hard work that goes into creating any type of new programming, we really did see huge benefits for all of those that were involved. For learners, we saw really very clearly that they recognized that the programming that was being delivered met their needs and helped prepare them for their next steps. And we had lots and lots of great examples from our WESCan partners and quotes, some of which end up being in the guide that Marisa just mentioned. that show how much people recognized that what they were learning through this kind of a program helped them meet those needs. It gave learners an opportunity to link with other agencies, other service providers, and other individuals within their communities in ways that perhaps the program hadn't been able to do earlier when it was working more in isolation, and that was very, very positive for them. So they were able to connect with other service providers that helped put them in a better position for when either within the program or for next steps when they left the program. And finally, it helped learners really see achievable program outcomes. So no longer were they thinking that they were going to be in a program for, in some cases, an interminable period of time, but they could see that, okay, if I learn this and this and this, and it was all kind of clearly set out, that they would actually be able to move on, and that the points of connection between, or points of exit in that program led directly to points of entry for their next steps, including employment or skills training. For programs, we saw higher program retention rates. We saw programs that were able to set more realistic program durations. So just as in some cases learners thought programs were going to go on and on for a very long time, on the program side, sometimes it was really hard for program staff to estimate how long an individual needed to be in a program. But once through program design, they had really sort of wrestled with, well, what do we need to teach? What do people need to learn? And how can people get some of the other skills that they need, which may or may not occur within our literacy program? They were much more easily able to quantify time periods and give realistic estimates to learners about what they could achieve within the time frame that they had. They definitely saw better attendance in programs. They saw cases in all of the WESCan partners. I think what they saw was that individuals came to programming because they felt that there was a real value to it, and that if they missed something, they were going to be missing something that they actually needed. So that was seen as a real positive. Programs did see higher numbers of learners moving on to skills training programs and to employment. What was interesting is that they actually saw higher numbers of people moving on to things like further education, which was really, it was unexpected for us. But I think it was a scenario in which, because the program had a focus, people could see themselves in it, understood what they were going to learn, found value in it, stayed in it, and then even if they decided that employment wasn't necessarily the most realistic next step for them, they could identify some other goal that was realistic. So in some cases, it ended up being further education. We saw benefits for employers as well, and certainly that is that we can better prepare literacy learners with the skills that they're going to use on the job. We can help prepare literacy learners so that they understand what workplace expectations are. That goes beyond reading and writing and numeracy, but also into some of the other more the employability skills. Workers can recognize how things like teamwork and attitude affect their productivity, affect their ability to be successful on the job, and all of those things become all of the topics become things that can be discussed in a workforce essential skills program. And of course, when workers have better skills, they're safer on the job, and we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that we are preparing people to do, in some cases, jobs that would put them at risk. And so having the skills to be able to read the hazard report forms or fill out things, or to speak to somebody if they don't know what to do safely, are really critical skills. So that's it in a nutshell. I believe what's going to happen next is that we're going to be taken off of the headset, and if people have any questions, now's, I guess, the time. We have a couple minutes for questions, and we'll respond via the speakerphone, so hopefully you'll be able to hear us. Thank you very much for your attention.
Hi, everyone. So we're on to the question and answer section of the webinar. So first one for Karen and Marisa, we have one from Kim. How are learner and program outcomes assessed or determined? One of the tools that I mentioned at the beginning, one of PTP's tools, is something called CAMERA. It's a series of standardized assessments. CAMERA stands for the Communication and Math Employment Readiness Assessment. That tool was used by the partners to monitor learners' progress. As well, partners also used other informal tools to evaluate kind of interpersonal skills, that sort of thing as well.
Okay, great. So I have another one from Joanne. Do the employment learners get long-term employment? They have sustainable in brackets here. So is it sustainable?
Well, that's a good question, and WESCan actually ended. It was a 2-year project that ended when programs had been delivering for about 6 months in some cases, a little longer in other cases. So long-term statistics would be gathered, I guess, by those programs. PTP does gather their own statistics in Ontario, and certainly it's an issue for all workers, but certainly for individuals with lower levels of literacy skills. What we can say is that we focused very heavily on not just the skills that someone needed to get the job, but the skills that people needed to sustain employment. And so that's what that meant, and this was something that was deserved and merited a great deal of discussion amongst our partners, was that it wasn't enough to just get someone a job, that really what people saw their role as literacy practitioners was to help that individual realize their potential and however they saw that to be. And so in some cases it meant staying in programs longer than say, would strictly be required to get a very, very entry-level job. It was really up to the individuals, and it was up to the communities, and that's where Marisa was sort of walking you through some of the different considerations. Working with the community, working with local employers to make sure that everyone's on the same page about what those employment expectations are. We saw that as something of great value, and we really saw that it worked very well in communities where there was ongoing dialogue between employers and literacy providers. So where they were talking to each other, they were able to keep individuals in employment longer, and both sides learned a lot from that experience.
Okay, great. I have Amanda from St. John's. How many learners were involved in the WESCan project?
I'll try to answer this, but I offhand I'm not sure, actually. One of the things that we really focused on with WESCan was not trying to, let's say, reach the largest number of individuals, but instead focusing more on establishing sustainable programming for communities. So over the course of WESCan, probably, I'm going to guess, maybe 100 learners were involved. But keep in mind that the programs that, or the agencies that were the WESCan partners during the WESCan project, those agencies for the most part have continued to deliver workforce essential skills programming, and so even more learners have been part of ongoing workforce essential skills efforts across the country.
Okay, great. And this kind of follows up with what you just said from Corianne. How many of the partners have continued with the program following the completion of the project?
We're still in contact, and PTP maintains contact with all of the partners, really. They're all delivering workforce essential skills programming. How that looks is different in those different communities, which again we saw as a real strength of the project, the ability to go in and sort of help individuals, provide them with the support that they felt they needed, but have them customize a program that met their community's needs and their learners' needs. So because they were able to do that, and it wasn't a cookie-cutter approach, that really did help them to build programs that were sustainable. Marisa mentioned that there was a small amount of money provided to programs through OLES, but we were very clear that the money itself couldn't be something that, when taken away, would mean the end of a workforce essential skills program. So all of those programs were sustainable, and they all continue to operate to this day, with lots of exciting developments, actually. So people have taken them off into directions that we couldn't have foreseen, but that work really, really well for their communities.
Okay, great. This is from Bridget. You worked across the country. Can you give us an idea of how many different parts of the country embrace the notion of workforce essential skills? Are there big differences?
Well, that's a good question. You know, I guess one of the, my sense is that, you know, given the huge interest that we saw when we put out a request for partners, that really was from coast to coast, all 3 coasts. And we didn't see any differences. There was a really high level of enthusiasm in all provinces and territories. So no, I certainly can't say that I saw any regional differences at all.
That said, one of the things that we found was that although there was a lot of interest in workforce essential skills programming, even the partners or the people that we've been in contact since who are interested in workforce essential skills don't necessarily haven't had an opportunity to develop a really in-depth understanding of what it is and how to do it and what it means in terms of the delivery models that they're accustomed to in their regions. So although I think there's been interest across the board, I think across the board we have a lot to sort of learn from each other as we take workforce essential skills kind of to the next level.
And just to pick up on that, I guess the one other difference that we definitely saw region to region was that in some jurisdictions there was more appetite for this type of programming than in others. So in some provinces this is a relatively new way of thinking about literacy. Even though essential skills may be top of mind for funders, it doesn't necessarily translate into the classroom, into changes in the classroom. And so there may well be, and we saw jurisdictions in which funding tended to be tied to particular models of programming and that tended to be more traditional. And so programs that wanted to change sometimes had to really talk that through with their funders in order to be able to do that. Even though they could show that they were still delivering literacy programming, it didn't look like traditional literacy programming, and so that was perceived to be perhaps not, perceived differently. So I think that that's something that when we speak about this kind of programming nationally, thinking about how that plays out across the different provinces and territories and whether or not, in fact, the funding mechanisms that are in place and the program models that are in place actually do support that despite the huge enthusiasm that tends to be on the ground.
Okay, great. I just want to say I'm going in order, so hopefully we'll get to all the questions in the time allotted. So the next one is from Sarah. What kind of certification would a learner get after the program?
There was no particular certification. In some cases, programs may have decided to acknowledge participation in some particular way. As Marisa said, there's a standardized test that all of the WESCan partners used, and so they could, if they wanted, document the results of those assessments. But there was no particular requirement to certify the programs.
Okay, next one is from Kim. Did you identify any further research questions for study as a result of the WESCan project?
Well, what's interesting is what we wanted to be able to do next was really bring the model or what we learned to new communities. What we found for WESCan is working with these partner sites, we were kind of starting from the beginning and giving people lots of room to set up their programs however they felt made sense for them. And through that, as I mentioned, we learned about things like actually there's an implementation process that you can actually follow to fairly systematically make your way from where you are now to having strong programming. So I think the next step would have been to have worked with additional communities to help to take them through what we learned through WESCan to to sort of more efficiently, if you will, go from where they are to having a workforce essential skills, a community-specific, locally relevant workforce essential skills program.
Okay, the next one is from Peggy Ann. Employer hiring clients for jobs. Does this person have disabilities? Is there statistics in that area?
If I understand the question correctly, one of the since workforce essential skills is based on essential skills research, and essential skills research comes from what we know people have to do on the job, there definitely is a link between, of course, what learners learn in workforce essential skills programs and what people will have to do on the job. What can be challenging, and we talked a little bit about this during the webinar, is helping employers see that link. For employers, you know, the essential skills is still fairly new. Some employers are very much on board with essential skills and understanding how important essential skills are to a worker's ability to do their job, but many are not. And so the link is there. I think literacy programs or service providers need to help make that link clear for employers.
Okay, I think we have time for maybe one more question. This one's from Katrina. Can you tell us more about how you engage with employers and what the response was to discussions about qualifications and screening tools?
Well, we had some really interesting discussions about that. We were during one of our visits, we were told by all of the practitioners that one of the huge barriers in that region was a grade 12, was a requirement for of employers to hire only people with a grade 12. And coincidentally, the WESCan partner who was leading the charge, leading the program, had arranged for a couple of meetings with employers that afternoon. And so Maurice and I were able to sit in on those conversations. And it didn't take 5 minutes for this question of grade 12, the grade 12 requirement to come up. And in fact, the employers, and this was a very small town, and these two employers were significant employers in the town. Neither of them actually had that requirement. In fact, they were quite clear that if people could demonstrate that they had the skills they needed to do the work, that they were more than happy to take individuals without a grade 12. So that was sort of one, you know, not to say that that didn't exist in other communities. We did see it exist. But again, I think it was more a question of actually talking to employers. I think sometimes as educators, we make assumptions, and I think employers make assumptions about what happens in education, but we certainly make assumptions about what happens with employers and what those expectations are. And I think more than anything, it's about starting that dialogue with employers in the communities to understand where those perceived requirements come from, whether they are absolutely necessary, and whether, if in fact you can show that the programming that you're doing can help people build the skills that they need to be successful on the job, whether employers will actually accept that. And in our experience, that has been the case more often than not, although certainly, you know, that you can't say that that's all across the board, because we do know that those requirements still do exist in some communities.
Okay, thank you very much. We're actually out of time now. For those of you who asked a question that we didn't get to, we'll try to keep track of them and answer them potentially in a post-webinar email that we'll be sending out to all of you. We encourage you all to take the evaluation that we'll also be sending out. Thank you so much, Karen and Marisa. This is really interesting, and we can't wait to hear more about the WESCan project.
Thank you.
Thank you.